All right, thank you all for coming. The first thing and the most important thing is do not look at the sun with your bare eyes. It can damage your retina very quickly, and you might not even know it's being damaged for a long time, maybe hours afterwards. So you do not want to do that. We have Eclipse glasses available for you to share. I don't know if there's enough for one for everyone or not, but there should be enough for one per family unit. It is safe to look at the eclipse through those. But yeah, make sure you do not look at the sun without those. Now, what are eclipses? Does anyone want to give an answer as to what eclipses are? A shadow, the moon. Uh-huh. Well, basically, you have the sun, the earth, and the moon all lined up. Now, there are two major types of eclipses. There are lunar eclipses, which is when the earth's shadow covers the moon, and usually it covers the whole face of the moon, and you're able to see it from an entire hemisphere of the earth, wherever the moon is visible in the sky. And when that happens, the sun's light refracts through the earth's atmosphere and makes a little reddish tint. And that lands on the moon, and that's why they call it a blood moon, because there's reddish tint from the sun's light. Now, a lunar eclipse can only happen during a full moon. By contrast, a solar eclipse, that's what's happening today, can only happen during a new moon, and it's only visible. It's not visible over an entire hemisphere. It's only visible over a fairly narrow but long path. Now, the path varies in width, but it can be from maybe a few tens of miles wide at the most. But it can be very long. Like this particular eclipse, you can see it all the way from Oregon. It goes through Oregon and Nevada and New Mexico and Texas, and then it cuts over the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, Central America, then it goes across Colombia and Brazil and South America. And now there's the difference between a total and an annular eclipse. Now, the important thing here is that both the moon and the sun are different sizes at different times. You've probably heard of the supermoon that was in the news a couple of months ago. Like, a lot of people went out and viewed the supermoon and commented on Facebook about how big and bright it was. Well, that's because the moon's orbit around the Earth is not a perfect circle, it's an ellipse. So if this is the Earth, the moon might be here at its perigee, which is the closest point, and then on the other side of the orbit, it's a little farther away, and that's called its apogee. So it's farther away. And you know that the closer something is to you, the larger it appears. So when the moon is closer to us, it appears larger in the sky, and it will cover the sun completely, and that's a total eclipse. When it's a little farther away, it does not cover the sun completely, and that's an annular eclipse. Now, what to expect? Oh, I should cover the definition of annular. Annular means ring, or it comes from the word annulus, which means a ring or the distance between concentric circles. So here we have two circles, and one is fully inside the other. So you have a ring of the outer circle in the inner circle, and the annulus is the distance between the outer ring and the inner ring. And that's what you're going to see today with the ring of fire of the sun is going to be fully around the moon. And that'll happen at 10:38 this morning. Now, what to expect? Oh, crud. What to expect? As we get closer to annularity, the sky will get a little bit darker, but probably not as much as you might expect. Still, 5%, the moon will cover 95% of the sun, and 5% of the light will get through. And it turns out that 5% of the sun's light is still quite a bit. So it's not going to get completely dark, but it will get noticeably darker. And you're going to see the disk of the moon slowly encroach over the disk of the sun until 1038, when it's fully inside the ring of the sun. And at that point, you might see some birds starting to act crazy when the sky gets darker, because they don't know what's going on. So then they might fly around and squawk and make weird noises. And squirrels and other things might do the same if we had squirrels here. Now, and after annularity, the same process will repeat in reverse. It will, the moon will exit the sun's disk on the other side, and the sky will get light again. Now, during totality, it's a lot different than that. Well, the same thing happens, but at the instant of totality, when the moon covers the sun completely, the sky will get instantaneously significantly darker. In fact, it's dark enough that you can see stars. And the really cool part is that there's a golden glow around the horizon, because, as I said, the path of the eclipse is fairly narrow, only a few tens of miles wide at the most. So you're able to see around the horizon that's not in totality, and that makes for an eerie golden glow. Now, a total solar eclipse is one of the great spectacles of nature, and the next one is on April 8th of next year, and it goes through the hill country of Texas. So I strongly, strongly recommend that if you're at all able, you make it to the hill country of Texas to witness that event. Now, a little bit about the history of eclipses. Just briefly, a couple things just very briefly, that eclipses used to mark certain times of and seasons of great events, like they would say what events occurred around the eclipse, and they would use it to mark longer periods of time. And also, the ancient people considered eclipses as bad omens. But what I really want to focus on is a guy named Albert Einstein. Are you all familiar with Albert Einstein? Yes. Well, he came up with this crazy theory called relativity. And he worked it out with math that space and time are interrelated such that huge bodies of mass like stars should bend light, and also if you're traveling close to the speed of light, your mass increases, which is called mass dilation, and time itself slows down, which is called time dilation. Now, this is all completely crazy and completely non-intuitive and not anything like what we experience in normal life. So how on earth do you go about testing that? Well, an eclipse provided the answer. There's a certain star that was projected to be close to the sun, very close to the disk of the sun at a certain time of year. And of course, when the sun's out and the sky is blue, there's no way to tell where the star is exactly, because the sunlight covers it up. It blocks it all out. But when an eclipse when the moon perfectly covers the sun, and you see the sun's corona just outside the disk, which is the outer layer of sun's gas, but does not include direct sunlight, and the atmosphere is black, and you can also see stars nearby. So that provided an opportunity to measure the position of the star in relation to where it was expected. So we had one scientist going to West Africa and another scientist going to Brazil to take measurements, and it turned out that Einstein was right. The light from the star was shifted in just the exact way he predicted. So Einstein's theory of relativity passed its first major test. And that's important because general relativity, combined with the fact that the universe is expanding, helps us to determine that the universe, including time and space dimensions, came into existence a finite period of time ago. And if the universe had a beginning, then it necessarily has to have a beginner. Now, another thing is, it's a bit fortuitous that we live in the right time in Earth's history to experience perfect total solar eclipses. Now, the scientists have established the age of the Earth at about 4.56 billion years old, and the moon at first was much closer to the Earth than it is now, and it gets farther away from the Earth at about 2 or 3 centimeters per year. Billions of years ago, the moon would have been far too close to have perfect eclipses. Like, there would have been frequent total eclipses, but the moon would have been far too large to allow us to study the sun's corona. It would have been far too large to test general relativity with that experiment. And hundreds of millions of years from now, the moon will be too far away for total eclipses to happen at all, and all eclipses will be annular. Now I wanted to talk a bit about photography. I have a solar filter. I was going to bring it up here, but it's still attached to my camera, that blocks out all but 1/100,000th of the light. That allows you to take photos of the sun safely. And I can have that available if you want to snap a cell phone shot through it or something like that. I don't recommend looking through it. But if you really want to do it right, or if you want a really good shot or a sort of good shot, you kind of need a DSLR camera with either a long lens or a telescope, because otherwise the sun is going to be fairly small in the frame. And even with my 400 millimeter lens, it's good enough, but it doesn't cover anywhere near the full frame. But again, you can snap a cell phone shot without the filter. There's a slight possibility that it'll damage the camera, but I don't think so, because cameras tend to get the sun in the frame a lot, and it doesn't normally affect it too much. But it probably won't be a great photo. But yeah, I'll have that filter available. Now, if you have a DSLR camera and are wondering how to film the sun, including sunspots, I use ISO 200 and a shutter speed of 1/1600th of a second and an aperture of f11. And I already got one shot this morning, and we'll see some later. I'll be able to show them. Now, during totality, if you go to Texas next year, and I hope you do, here are some shots I took of totality in Oregon in 2017 during the total solar eclipse. Now, I used an ISO of 400, an aperture of f5.6, and a variable shutter speed between 1/8000th and about 1/100th. Now, this is a fast shutter speed. I don't know how easily visible this is, but the photos will be up here. With a very fast shutter speed, you can see kind of a purple tinge around the edge of the moon, and that's the sun's corona. And here you can see just a little bit of sparkle. That's called the Bailey's beads, and that comes from just a tiny bit of sunlight coming through the terrain of the moon, and that's pretty cool. With a slightly higher slightly slower shutter speed, you can see a little more of the corona and some of the effects of the gas around the sun. It brings that out a little more. And with an even slower shutter speed, you can see even more of that effect. And this is the diamond ring where the sun is just appearing again afterwards. Now, I might recommend that for your first total eclipse, you might not want to worry too much about photography. Just enjoy the experience, because it will be visually very exciting, and you don't want to have to be fussing at your camera too much unless you're really a nerd about that kind of thing, like I am. And during totality, you can take the solar filter off the lens. Now, if you really want to do it well, using the setup I have with a 400 millimeter lens, the sun doesn't stay in the frame for a long time because the sun moves. So you kind of have to adjust it every once in a while. If you want to do it really well, you can get an equatorial mount that moves the camera and the telescope the camera and the telescope or lens along with the sun, and that will make things a lot easier. So that is it about eclipses. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, Mike, I do.
Uh-huh.
On the total eclipse, you mentioned earlier about when it gets dark, that the birds act erratic or what. What about the varmints and critters that are nocturnal? Will they come out here? Because I'm hearing about a skunk coming out.
So the question is, will the nighttime critters come out? I don't know. I don't actually think so, at least not during totality. We're not going to have totality today, but during totality, it's at least possible that some will poke out. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know for sure. It is a hypothesis that could be tested in Texas in a few months.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
That's where I said I'll be the one that gets sprayed. So.
Anything else?
Well, Mike, I'm just kind of curious about the damage. Looking at the eclipse without glasses, there's a lot of folks around here that don't know this eclipse today, and they walk around, they see something, the light changing, and they say, "What's going on?" And they look up at the sun. What's going to happen to those folks?
Yeah. So the question is, what's going to happen to folks that don't know there's an eclipse and look up at the sun when they see it changing? Yeah, there have been instances where people have lost vision doing that. So that's why there's a public service campaign to announce that the eclipse is coming and to practice safe viewing habits, and to either use the glasses or project using a pinhole or binoculars. So yeah, that is an unfortunate event. There probably will be some people today whom that will happen to. How often are there total eclipses? Approximately once every year or so, or a little 18 months or so. Some of them are total, some of them are annular. The next one, of course, is next year. Then there's one in August 2026 in Iceland that I'm kind of excited about. I'm kind of starting to think about that. I think there's one between the two, but that's less easy to reach. Anything else? Okay.
You mentioned the timing that we're in to see these eclipses, and that you couldn't see these before, or they would only be partial ones, and then in so many years, because of the expansion of the universe getting further apart, that we won't see them. Is there a year predicted about when you won't be able to have any more total eclipses?
Yeah, I think they're predicting the total solar eclipses will stop in, I think, between 600 million years and 1.4 billion. So that's a good range. Yeah, I don't think we'll be around then. Right. Anything else? If not, then we can take a break and we'll talk about how astronomy points to God in about 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thanks again for coming. Now, I first want to say that this is a talk based on both the Bible and science. This event was promoted to churches and homeschool groups. If you're a member of the general public who happened upon this, you're absolutely welcome to stay and listen, and I hope you do. But just note that this is a talk based on the Bible, and if that's not your cup of tea, you're free to go about your way. Okay. Today we're going to look at Psalm 19, which is composed of 3 parts. Part 1 talks about God's world and God's universe. Part 2 talks about God's word. And part 3 is our response. Whoever has part 1, can you please come up and read it?
No. Louder. Can't hear you.
The heavens declare the glory of God.
Better.
And the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat.
Thank you. So what do we see here? We see that what we see in the heavens, what God has created, what we see in the heavens is a reliable indication of what God has created. There's all kinds of cool things we can study. There's quasars and black holes and supernovas and nebulae and binary stars, and we should study all of that because it gives us a reliable, accurate record of what God has actually done. Now, the passage makes special reference to the sun, so a little bit more about that. I'm sure that when David wrote that psalm, he was thinking about the sun rising in the east and going overhead and setting in the west like we would normally experience every day. But there's a lot more to it than that. The sun actually orbits around the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and its orbital period is 230 million years. So every 230 million years, it makes a complete trip around the Milky Way galaxy. And does anyone know the speed that the sun is going around the galaxy? About 500,000 miles per hour. And we're all going along with the sun, so we're all traveling at 500,000 miles an hour right now relative to the galaxy, so maybe we should all throw up our hands and go, whee! So, okay, whoever has section 2 of Psalm 19, can you please come up and read?
Take the mic off, Dewey, if you want.
Okay. I'll just go. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoice in the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are than they gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them, there is great reward.
All right, thank you. So what do we see here? We see that the law of the Lord, that his words, as preserved and given to us in the text of the Bible, is pure, it's perfect, his commandments are excellent, his wisdom is pure. We would do well to study it. Just as we study the heavens and learn about what God has done, we should study the Bible and learn about God's plan for us, what God desires for us. So we're blessed if we study and learn the Bible and live by it. Okay. Now the other part, the part 2 of the Belgic Confession. The Belgic Confession is a 16th century Reformation era confession of faith, and it says something very similar to Psalm 19. So Article 2, the means by which we know God.
Article 2. We know God by 2 means. First, by creation, preservation, and government of the universe, since that universe is before our eyes like a beautiful book, in which all creatures, great and small, are as letters to make us ponder the invisible things of God. God's eternal power and divinity, as the Apostle Paul says in Romans 1:20. All these things are enough to convict humans and to leave them without excuse. Second, God makes himself known to us more clearly by his holy and divine word as much as we need in this life for God's glory and for our salvation.
All right, thank you. So we see there that the Belgic Confession says something very similar to Psalm 19. It shows us that we know God both by studying his heavens and by studying his word, and they should both agree. His heavens shows us what he did, his word tells us what he said, and if there's a contradiction or an apparent contradiction between the two, then we're probably misunderstanding one or both of them. Now, before I continue, I need to note that there is a controversy in Christian circles about the age of the Earth and the universe. Some people believe that the Earth is and the universe are less than 10,000 years old. Some accept the scientifically established ages of 4.56 billion years old for the Earth and about 13.8 billion years old for the universe. I guess I have to spill the beans that I'm in the latter camp because there are a lot of very good reasons for that the scientific community has established the longer ages. It's not just pulling numbers out of the dark to remove God or prove evolution or something like that. And also, I believe there's no conflict at all between the longer ages and the words of the Bible, even the literal interpretation of the words of the Bible. And this is important because some of the following points kind of rely on the longer ages. Now, if you're a young Earth believer, you might be wondering why you should still be paying attention to me. And I have a couple of reasons that you might want to think about. The first is, well, if the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, you're definitely right that God exists. And that's a good thing. But I hope to show that if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, well, the case for God is just as strong. It does not cede 1 inch to naturalism. And also, secondly, if you talk to atheists or other scientific skeptics about this kind of stuff, I promise you're going to have a better time if you make reference to what's established by science. So with that said, did you know that there are 11 verses in the Old Testament prophets that talk about God stretching out the heavens? Some of them are in present tense, like God stretches out the heavens. Some are in past tense, God stretched out the heavens. Well, the dominant cosmology, the Big Bang, says that the universe came into existence from nothing and had an initial rapid expansion called inflation, and it's been expanding ever since. And in fact, now it's accelerating its expansion. So God continues to stretch it out. Now, 2 verses in Jeremiah, both 10:12 and 51:15, say, by his understanding, he stretched out the heavens. Can science tell us anything about God's understanding and just how great it is? I think the answer to that is yes. First, there's the mass density of the universe. Now, to explain this, I have to explain the concept of the observable universe. Now, the observable universe is the part of the full universe where the light has had time to reach our telescopes, and we can theoretically observe it with powerful enough telescopes. Now, that observable universe encompasses about 200 billion trillion stars. Now, that's about 6 billion stars for every dollar of the national debt. Yeah. So, now just think of, now the mass density of the universe has to be at one part in, fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. That is 1 followed by 60 zeros. Now, do you know what 1 part in 10 to the 60th is of 200 billion trillion stars? It turns out it's about the mass of a single dime. So now, we can see the sky getting darker. So now it probably wouldn't matter much if you add or subtract the mass of a dime now, but at the creation event, if the part of the universe that would become our observable universe were more or less massive by a single dime, then the expansion of the universe would not have been able to provide a suitable planet that could be a suitable home for humanity. So by his understanding, he stretched out the heavens. But that's actually nothing compared to the space energy density. Now, I mentioned Albert Einstein in the last talk. Well, one thing he did not want to do, well, the space energy density is the same thing as Albert Einstein's cosmological constant. Einstein tried his entire career to get rid of the cosmological constant because he did not like its implication. But late in his life, he admitted that was the biggest mistake he ever made. The cosmological constant definitely exists, and it's highly fine-tuned. It turns out, well, the expansion of the universe during its first 9 or so billion years was governed by the mass density, which we just talked about, and now it's being governed mostly by the space energy density, or the cosmological constant. And that cosmological constant has to be fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 122 power. So that's 1 with 122 zeros after it. If you think a dime is impressive, well, there are a lot fewer than 10 to the 122 subatomic particles in the observable universe. So yeah, that's a far greater possibility than there are subatomic particles. Another verse I might mention is Isaiah 42:5. God created the heavens and stretched them out. I don't know how you would describe Big Bang cosmology more succinctly or more accurately than that. Now, finally, I want to propose a 3-way authentication method to how we authenticate that the Bible is from God. Now, to do this, I have kind of a geeky analogy. And if you know how the internet works, this might make sense. And if you don't, hopefully you can follow anyway. Now, I used to work at a company that provided internet servers to customers. And these servers did various things, among which was sending email. And sometimes a customer would call up saying, "Why won't other servers accept my email?" Well, there is a 3-way protocol of things we would check. First, well, when a server gets an incoming email message, there are 3 things it can do, and we can easily check those things. What it can do first is take the internet address of the incoming message, such as 1.2.3.4, and do a reverse lookup into the block of network addresses to find out what it thinks the name of the server should be. So it might do a reverse lookup on 1.2.3.4, and maybe the answer would come back email.mycompany.com or whatever. Then, and that shows that the owner of the network block agrees. Then it would take that name that it returned, mail.mycompany.com, and do a forward lookup into the domain. And that should return the address 1.2.3.4, and that should agree, and that proves that the owner of the domain agrees. And finally, it can make a connection to the mail port on the server itself, and it should say, "Hello, I am email.mycompany.com, and I should be sending email." So you have the owner of the network block, the owner of the domain, and the owner of the server all agree that this is email.mycompany.com and it should be sending email. Now, what on earth does this have to do with authenticating the Bible? Well, I worked 3rd shift, and it struck me one night that this has a strong parallel to how we can authenticate that the Bible is from God. I would propose that the universe is the reverse pointer. The universe shows us that it's highly fine-tuned, as we just saw, and that it had to come from nothing. Even space and time dimensions had to come from nothing. So whatever caused the universe, whatever or whoever brought the universe into existence, had to be extremely mind-bogglingly intelligent and exist outside of space and time dimensions. Then I would say that the Bible is the forward pointer, the words of the Bible. They describe a God who is unimaginably intelligent and exists outside of space and time. In fact, Titus 1:2 talks about God's promises from before the beginning of time. And the direct attestation is the historical person of Jesus Christ. He came and lived a perfect life, a perfect sinless life, and a miraculous life. He was crucified. On the 3rd day, he miraculously rose from the dead, all testifying that, yes, I am God. And if you're not familiar with the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, it's pretty substantial. A couple of very brief things are that the tomb was found empty, and there was a sudden transformation of the cowardly apostles into bold preachers. And who knows, maybe I could do a talk about that around Easter in detail. But so we have the author or the creator of the universe, the author of the Bible, and the historic person of Jesus Christ, all attesting, yes, there is this God. I am He, says Jesus. I am your Savior. I created the universe. Now, one last verse from Jeremiah before we finish up Psalm 19. Jeremiah 33, verses 25 and 26. The context of that is the people of Israel are in captivity. and nothing has changed, and they're worried about God's promises. Can they actually believe God when he gives these promises? So whoever has the passage from Jeremiah, can you please come up and read?
Jeremiah 33, 25, and 26.
Hold the mic down towards you. There you go.
Thus says the Lord, if I have not established my covenant with day and night and the fixed order of heaven and earth, then I will reject the offspring of Jacob and David, my servant, and will not choose one of his offspring to rule over the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For I will restore their fortunes and will have mercy on them.
All right. Now, when I was planning this event, I was not worried that maybe something was a little off and I'd get all these people here and nothing would happen and I'd look ridiculous. I was not worried about that because the laws, the order of heaven and earth, or as the NIV puts it, the laws that govern the heavens are fixed. And they're fixed to the point that we can predict these eclipse events with extreme precision for centuries. Now, I was worried about cloud cover because it turns out that clouds tend to put a damper on eclipse viewing. But that eclipse, it still happens. And if you look at the clouds, you're going to see them get darker. And it strikes me that that's a good analogy to when you have situations in your life where that might cloud your view of God. It might look like God is invisible for a time. But if you look hard enough, you're always going to find signs that he's there. And in any case, you can always take his promises to the bank. Now, this passage says that God's promises, including the ultimate promise of sending Jesus, are just as reliable as the laws of physics that govern the heavens. And again, that allow us to predict these eclipse events with such high precision. Now, Jesus himself goes even farther than that. In Matthew 24:35, he says, "Heaven and earth may pass away, but my words will never pass away." So the Old Testament equates God's promises with the laws of physics, and Jesus says they're far more reliable even than that. With that in mind, can we finish up Psalm 19? So whoever has section 3.
Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord my God, my rock and my redeemer.
All right. So, what is our response to all this? We should definitely be in awe of God and worship him and seek to understand and do his will. But more than that, I want us to see that it's really that we ask God to do all this, but it's God who does it. We're all sinners. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we all have these presumptuous hidden sins we know about, sins we don't know about. But it's God who helps us take care of those. Ephesians 2:8 and 9, it's by God's grace that works in us to produce our faith that allows us to seek him. But it's him, not our works, it's him that takes care of our sins and makes us blameless. Now, how blameless does he make us? Well, 2 Corinthians 5:21 sheds light on that. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. If you put your sins at the cross and trust into Jesus, no matter how bad your sins are, then he will see you as perfect and pure and as obedient as Jesus. When you stand before him, he will see nothing but his own righteousness, and of course he'll let you into heaven. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. I hope this event serves as an enduring reminder to everyone here about God's faithfulness. Now let's go enjoy annularity, and we can come back later for more Q&A and discussion. Thank you.
Good job, Micah. You're free.
Epilogue. If you're wondering how my own photography did, well, I got a few decent shots of the partial phases of the eclipse. I actually had somewhat of a fail during annularity. I somehow couldn't find the sun in the camera, and I'm not quite sure what happened there. I will also say that some people did manage to get pretty good shots of annularity using a cell phone camera through the eclipse viewing glasses. So I'm going to modify my perspective on that. That's actually a fine way to do it if you want a quick shot. But the coolest part of it is, at the end there was this cool halo effect around the sun, and I just snapped a quick shot of that with my phone, and I wasn't expecting to get the eclipse in that because that's not really how you get eclipse pictures, but the cool part is the eclipse actually showed up in the lens flare. So there you have it. I hope you learned something about both eclipses and about God during this presentation. Be blessed.